Right. Good evening, everyone. So nice to see some of you. We hadn't seen in a little while. Zuisei, so nice to see you. Welcome back. Kurt, also nice to see you on a Wednesday night. Well, you know that we've been speaking about dependent origination, pratitya samutpada, this quintessential teaching about how things come to be. I've described it as the teaching on how things arise, how they persist for a moment, how they pass away, and how it is that they come together to form what we call existence. And tonight, I wanted to speak about the first link in the chain. I wanted to speak about ignorance, avidya. I couldn't find a source, a reliable source for the phrase ignorance as the prime mover. I know that I didn't come up with it. I heard it somewhere or I read it somewhere, but there is a sprinkling on the internet of teachers referring to it as such, the root cause of all of our trouble. And I think it's worth to say that to understand more clearly what ignorance is, very specifically in Buddhism, will help us to not only dispel it, hopefully, but also to give knowledge, give more intellectual study its due. Because I think sometimes, particularly as Zen practitioners, we can get a little impatient with a more academic type of study because we think, isn't this about sitting and about experiential understanding? And I myself have said, that sometimes knowing is what gets in the way. And in fact, I was about to say it again, that knowing gets in the way is a form of ignorance or can be a form of ignorance. And that's true, but it's also true that there are many ways to grasp something directly. And that for us in Zen, perhaps the primary way or the most accessible way, I think, is that direct experience, direct realization, where you see something directly, particularly in Zazen. But it is also true that a more analytical, but still contemplative kind of study, as we have been learning a little bit about, as we've been doing the guided meditations, can also bring about a kind of insight. Those of you who are doing the Buddhist philosophy group, I think will get a sense of this. Studying Nagarjuna, he was really pushing for a very deep, precise, and immediate understanding into some of the teachings that he was elaborating on, particularly emptiness. And so, to not just discount anything that we can know a little bit more intellectually as a hindrance, to insight and to wisdom, but, to give each thing its due, to give it its place. For us, in the context of practice, you could say that ignorance is really the, what is it? The quality, the factor, the link in the 12 link chain that keeps us repeating all kinds of unhelpful habits. It's what creates, what makes life more difficult than it needs to be. And so avidya, as ignorance is called, certainly in the early sutras, means a lack of light. And we could think of it as a kind of blindness, whereas vidya means seeing, understanding, or light. And so to realize enlightenment is to illuminate what is dark, to shine a light on what has always been present, but hasn't been seen. And this is something that is important to remember. It's not that we're seeing something new. It's not that we're seeing something that was not there. It was there all along, but we couldn't see it. And so first, we can think of ignorance or delusion as not seeing what is there, as I said, as a kind of blindness. We can think of it also as seeing incorrectly or seeing partially, which is a kind of misperception, or as seeing too much of the wrong thing. Because sometimes it is our knowing that blinds us. Particularly when we see incorrectly or when we see only part of what there is to see, and then we become convinced of what we're seeing and then stake ourselves on it, right? We go to war because of it, not realizing that it's not real or it's not all that there is. And so Khandro Rinpoche says that ignorance is very clever. It knows a lot. And therefore it thinks that the teachings, or it helps us, it causes us to think that the teachings and the practice must be very complicated too. Because what is simple can't possibly be enlightenment. And sometimes some of the teachings, and I think I am at fault sometimes too, can make it sound as if things are complicated. I mean, I really work hard to try to say things as simply and directly as I can. But sometimes there is also just a lot to say. And so it can seem that that Buddhism and that the body that is the teachings of Buddhism can be complicated. And she says, ignorance loves to articulate, to express, and to be intelligent. So it mistrusts the simple teaching that all we need to do is to be selflessly kind. How complicated is that? She asks. It's a little bit like the Dalai Lama saying, my religion is simple. My religion is kindness. And she says, just be selfless. Just be kind. And how do you get there? She says, compassion and devotion. Those are the two times that we're closest to wisdom. Compassion and devotion. And devotion is not something we speak of often in Zen, but it is there. And in April, in fact, at the beginning of April, I've invited my friend and fellow teacher, Satya Robin, who is a Pure Land Buddhist. And their practice is a bit more devotional. So those of you who can join us for that will get a sense, that there is a way in which Buddhism allows for a devotional practice. But why are compassion and Buddhism and devotion the times that we're closest to wisdom? Well, in a way, because we're not thinking about what we're doing. We're not measuring. We're not scheming and planning and fabricating. We're not trying to be anyone, to do anything. As my teacher used to say, compassion just happens. It's like growing your hair. You don't have to strive. You don't have to force it. And by this, it doesn't mean that we don't practice it, that we don't cultivate it, because we do. But it's just that when compassion and wisdom, the two sides or the two wings of awakening are realized, then compassion flows very naturally from that understanding, particularly of our selfless nature, of our interconnected nature. And so then all you have to do is get out of the way and let it unfold. Devotion, I was thinking about this. Sometimes I think about it as a kind of surrender. we do finally decide to stop pretending to be something we're not. Like, we don't have to be smart. We don't have to be a good student, a good practitioner. We don't have to let anyone know about what we're doing. Like, we're just here. We're just present. Excuse me, very simply, very quietly, very unadornedly. A number of people are asking right now, how does sitting Zazen help? I mean, really help with everything that's going on in the world. What good is it to be still and quiet in the middle of a war, in the face of conflict, in the face of that endless vying for power that then creates more of that conflict? I mean, what real difference can Zazen make when so much of what's happening is not happening here and is out of my control? And that's the first misconception, that it's not happening here. And the second, that it's not in my control. Actually, that is true. It's not in our control, but nothing is. But that the misconception is that we don't have a say in it, that we don't have agency, that we don't have choice. So sitting still and quiet helps us, first of all, to stop telling ourselves stories, to, for a little while, stop fabricating reasons for acting the way that we do. So meditation it calms the waters so that we can see that the conflict that we see out there is the same conflict that we see in here. You've heard me say this before, and I will continue to say it because it's something that we can hear and nod and think like, oh, yes, yes. But to actually really understand that when we get angry at ourselves, when we get angry at one another, what we are doing is going to war. We're splitting the territory and saying, this is mine, this is yours. This I like, this I don't. This I keep, this I throw out. And usually, particularly with those things we don't like, we hide, we ignore, or we attack. We go on the defense. Or we mask. If we really don't like them, we find a way to not have to deal with them. And if we can, we get rid of them, we bury them. And in doing so, we kill bits of us, bits of others that we don't want to accept. But when we really stop for long enough to look closely at what is going on in our minds, in our bodies, then we realize that it's actually disingenuous to say, that's not me. I don't do that. Because we realize we do. When we're still, we're able to see how this whole mess that we find ourselves in has come to be. How it comes from a thought that turns into a story, that turns into action, that gives rise to awareness, a particular kind of awareness, that then we justify, in a sense, confirm by then what we touch, what we come into contact with, and so on. The rest of the chain unfolds. When we spend a little bit of time looking, then what we see out there or what we see in here doesn't shock us. And it doesn't take us by surprise. It doesn't offend us. We understand more clearly that suffering in all of its forms, is the inevitable result of our ignorance, of our delusion, of our craving, of not understanding that what I do to you, I do to myself, and vice versa. That what I do, that we are so interconnected, that what I do in the privacy of my own mind, in fact, affects the furthest reaches of the universe. And if this sounds like an exaggeration, that's okay, because you don't have to believe me. Please don't believe me. Just sit quietly and then see for yourself. A bit more practically, Zazen, it also helps us to make better choices about what to focus on, what to attend to, how to respond. So it's true that we're not just sitting quietly, that's not enough. We also have to act. And hopefully we act out of a deep love and care for the world, for ourselves, and out of a clear understanding. Not out of defensiveness, not out of selfishness. We do it out of kindness, not out of spite or fear. And so, to say it most simply, sitting still and studying our minds helps us to see clearly the difference between what will help and what will harm. Ignorance obscures that. By definition, it makes it harder to see. And in the sutras, in the early sutras in the Pali Canon, ignorance is really primarily ignorance of the Four Noble Truths. I touched on this when I did the class on dependent origination. It is not understanding that life is permeated by suffering because of the way we relate to it. It's not inherently suffering. That the root of that suffering is craving, really in the form of wanting what we don't have, like health, wealth, fame, eternal life. Wanting what we have and don't like to go away, sickness, old age, and death primarily, but also really anything that is unpleasant, anything that is uncomfortable, what we didn't ask for, what we weren't expecting, what's not convenient, what doesn't fit our image or our wish for a particular moment. That's a lot of our experience if you think about it. And it's craving, it's that wanting what we have and do like to stay. But it won't, because it can't. And so we suffer. And it's always fascinated me that even though when we start to practice particularly, we understand, and I think even without practice, on some level we understand that the things we turn to be happy can't deliver it, not in the long run, that we still pursue them so doggedly. Even though we see time and time again, it just doesn't deliver. It doesn't last. It's hard to let go. And I think some of it is maybe just because it seems easier. It seems easier to just buy a new pair of shoes or buy a new car or buy a new house or buy a new trip than to sit quietly. It certainly seems much more exciting than to sit quietly and just look and be like, what is going on with me? Like, what is actually happening here now? And so we don't realize, because we keep trying, it's another form of a wheel that we keep spinning on, looking for material things, among many others, to give us happiness. The band is very narrow for those things that we think will give us that happiness. And I think it takes a long time to consider first, and then to accept that we might be looking in the wrong place. Like that guy that in that joke that is looking for his keys. He's under a street lamp, and a person passes by and says, "What are you looking for?" He says, "My keys." "Oh, did you lose them here?" And the other person starts looking also. And the first guy is like, "Oh, no, not at all. But it's just that here is where the light is." That's exactly what ignorance is. And it's a good description, because it comes with a bit of laziness. We'll look, but only where it's convenient, where it's comfortable, where it's not too scary, or where we're not put out. The bodhisattva ideal is always pushing against those limits. Your neighbor or your friend asks you to do something, and there's that first impulse. But I'm so busy, I can't possibly. I will already do so much for everyone. I'm already doing stuff for people. The self is very predictable. It just constricts. Immediately, it just goes protecting what little it has. Freedom, on the other hand, is expansive, and it feels that way. So if at any point we're not sure, how am I doing? We just have to check in. How do I feel? How do I feel? Do I feel tight? Or do I feel open? And you could say that our vows, those vows we chant every Wednesday, the Bodhisattva vows, bodhicitta, the aspiration, to raise the mind of enlightenment for our sake and the sake of everyone. It's like pushing against those constraints, trying to make them a little bigger. Can you be a little larger? And eventually see there were no constraints. I think I said during one of the sessions, right? Independent origination. There was no self. We had created it. And it was an idea in our minds. And usually what is familiar is what we hold close, so that we can control it, in fact. The sense of me, the sense of mine, the sense of myself. We'll come back to that. Ignorance is not knowing that there's another way to go about living. As the Third Noble Truth says. It's not knowing that we have a choice in our suffering. And that if we want to be free, there's a path. The Fourth Noble Truth. There is something we can do. There's something we can do. So whenever you think, these teachings are complex, they're abstract, remember, but there's something you can always do something. Always. There's a path to follow. There's practices to cultivate. There are teachings to learn, to study, and integrate into our lives. And so, ignorance is ignorance of the Four Noble Truths, of suffering. Its root is cessation on the path. And in the chain of dependent origination, this ignorance leads to unskillful actions, to karma. We know as mental fabrications. all of those habits and tendencies. And, we don't have to look far to see how this comes to be. The instant we get triggered by something, immediately see the story just sprout before your eyes. I've always loved the word papancha, proliferation, because it's exactly what it is. It just mushrooms, right? Right in front of your eyes. And if you're not paying attention, it takes hold. It feels very real. And so you have to cut through. And in some versions of the chain, ignorance conditions mental formations, and mental formations condition ignorance. Actually, I think in all versions of the chain, this is true. And so we have to interrupt that loop. Ignorance is also the belief that the 5 skandhas of form, sensation, conception, mental formations, and consciousness are the self. This body, for example. Mostly, I take it to be me. I take it to be mine. I take it to be myself. Same with my stories, my perceptions, my memories, my thoughts. All of it is me. And this sense is very convincing. We're not making it up. There is something there, as someone said to me earlier. I mean, just think of a feeling. Let's say that you suddenly have a feeling of joy. It feels like it's yours, right? Like it's happening to you. And you might think, I'm feeling joy. I'm feeling it. And so in that moment, the feeling is mine. Usually we don't think that far, but that's the sense that we get. It's my feeling. Well, sometimes with certain feelings, yes, we might even say that if we feel like somebody's trying to take that away from us. You're angry, you're ranting, and then you're talking to your partner and they show you, the positive side. Actually, this has happened to me. You're like, wait, hear me out. Just let me be in my anger for a little bit. And so that's why ignorance is a form of conceit. What the sutras call the sense of this is mine, I am this is myself. But what happens if you let in a bit of space around that feeling? I've told a story about how some years ago I was sitting in the zendo and I was just stewing. I hadn't been that upset in a while. And I could tell part of me was relishing it. Part of me was feeding the story that was feeding the feeling. And part of me was trying to break out. But luckily, I had been reading the Satipatthana Sutta for Foundations of Mindfulness. And so the second foundation, feelings, Vedana, you recognize from the 5 skandhas, is the same. You notice the feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, and you just note it without trying to change it or even labeling the feeling necessarily. So there's a practice also where you can just say, I'm feeling joy. But there was a translation that I was reading that phrased it as a pleasant feeling has arisen in me. And so I tried it. I was sitting there marinating in my anger, and I said to myself, an unpleasant feeling has arisen in me. And, it was like puncturing a balloon. The energy just dissipated like that. And it was funny on top of that. When I put it that way, I almost burst out laughing. I saw how foolish it was to be so caught by something that had no substance whatsoever. But then I was saying to someone, don't try this at home, like with your spouse or with your kids. Your kid is throwing a tantrum and you're like Has an unpleasant feeling arisen in your mind stream? Or you tell your spouse, love has been felt. That's just weird. You know, I've known people who do this. That's just weird. And it gives Buddhists a bad rep, you know? Like when we take like the pronouns out of a sentence, we don't have to be weird. We can be normal. You know, we can recognize, I feel angry. I feel angry. It's okay to say I. Sometimes I'll have a conversation with one of you and you say I, or you say, I think, I feel, and you're like, oh, I'm sorry. Like you've said a curse word. Actually, someone said to me the other day, exactly that. I think, I don't know what. And he said to say a curse word. And it took me a few moments. I was like, a curse word? Which one was the curse word? Too complicated. It's not wrong to say I. We need it to communicate. We need it for language. And then in your own mind, you can recognize, yes, but this feeling is not me, is not mine. It is not myself. And see what happens when you recognize that. Going further, there's not even an fixed I who's feeling it. There is just a succession of thoughts and feelings and perceptions. That's what gives us a sense of I. That is the main teaching. One of the main teachings that dependent origination is showing. That is the teaching of the skandhas. You know, you really look closely, you take them apart, there is no I behind them, not in the way that we think. If our leaders understood this, wow, this would be a very different world. This is vidya, clear comprehension, clear seeing. Because ignorance can be very coarse on one hand. I don't see how I'm hurting you, or I don't care. Or it can be very subtle. There seems to be an I here. You know, I feel like there is. So what's all this talk about no self? And this is an excellent question, because that is, in fact, it's said to be one of the last things to go, this very subtle, some of the sutras speak of it as a perfume, like this aroma. It's that subtle of a self. You can have let go of the fetters, the taints, the desire for existence, the desire for sensual pleasures, and the desire for non-existence. You can have let go of all that and still feel, but there's a sense of me. So you're not making it up. But this is where the teaching of shunyata, emptiness, fits in very nicely. And so this takes us to how ignorance is understood in Mahayana Buddhism, particularly in Madhyamaka, the middle way school of which Nagarjuna was the founder, essentially. And so here, ignorance is primarily ignorance of emptiness. This is what Nagarjuna said, 2nd, 3rd century monk and philosopher. The mind, which distinctly understands emptiness, is an unmistaken mind, which eliminates the ignorance that arises from the four harmful preconceptions. Without that ignorance, the karmic formations will not arise, samskaras, remember, and neither will the remaining links of the chain. And so when ignorance doesn't arise, the other 12 links don't arise. And so here, ignorance is not knowing that the self and things and reality and the chain itself and even emptiness are all empty. They're empty of self-existence, self-nature, svabhava. They exist, but not independently. And you can think of them as ocean waves. Right? There's no such thing as a single wave. It's all part of the great ocean. And that's exactly how everything in the universe operates. And so those 4 preconceptions that he mentioned are seeing the impermanent as permanent, seeing what is unsatisfactory as pleasurable, seeing what is impure as pure, and seeing what is not self as self. And in a sense, we already cover them. But just to be clear, to see the impermanent as permanent, I mean, just your body, for example. You know, you feed it, you take it to the gym, you fret when it gains a little weight or when it loses it. Most likely, you're not thinking, this body is rapidly decaying. And so when it does happen, when it shows a sign of that, we're shocked, we're surprised, we feel betrayed. We want the body to remain still and fixed, essentially, in time. I think of the pain, the immeasurable pain that wishing our bodies to be a certain way has caused probably millions of people. A large percentage of them women, but not exclusively. The immeasurable suffering that wanting this to stay, to be, causes us. And so that this preconception is that felt sense of permanence. And taking that to be the truth of how things are. The second preconception is seeing what is unsatisfactory as pleasurable, as being able to give us satisfaction. Scrolling on social media, for example. You're sitting up in bed, you're watching videos on Instagram or TikTok. And while you're doing it, it does feel pleasurable. There's a definite dopamine hit. I mean, that's the way we do it. And so it's a little confusing, or maybe not. For some people, it might be confusing. You put the phone away, you turn it over, you fall asleep, and you realize your sleep is agitated. Or you wake up, or you can't fall asleep, or you wake up the next day and you realize you're anxious. And you feel kind of lonely. Or you feel bad about yourself. Or you're irritated. It's not pleasurable. And still, it could take quite a while to really let go, right? Because that dopamine hit is so powerful. One of the people I work with is a psychologist, and she works with people who have particularly screen addiction. And they speak of it in terms of, a level 1 pleasure would be that, because it's very easy. You just reach for your phone. And a level 3, I forget what level 2 is, but a level 3 is something that is a little harder to effectuate, but more lasting. Like you go for a walk. You actually get up, you go outside, and you go for a walk. And so she works with people in training them how to replace those level 1, very simple, very quick hits with level 3 activities that will give a more lasting kind of pleasure. That's very useful. And then going further for us to understand, generally we expect things to give us satisfaction that is not in their power to give us. The third preconception is to see what is impure as pure. And here, impure is not a matter of virtue. It's it's like seeing something as whole and consistent. It's like you fall in love, and for a while you see that person as perfect. Everything they do, everything they say, even the things that would be annoying in other circumstances, you just love everything about them. So there's a kind of cohesion to them in your mind. And those things that are inconsistent, you just ignore, you overlook. And so this preconception, the sense, the felt sense, is one of a consistent picture for something that is in fact a composite of many things, many parts. Someone who is smart and generous and loving, but perhaps can get insecure or anxious or mean when they feel threatened, or how we actually are as human beings. Much more nuanced, much more layered, and put together, if you will, of many, many different parts. And so that taking what is impure as pure, it really has to do with that sense of painting a whole picture and thinking something is existent in itself instead of a collection of all these different parts. And then the last one, seeing what is not self as self. It's basically underlying the other three and the crux of it for us, right? We think this is independent, that is fixed, and that it's at the center of my experience. That is, your teacher or your boss gives you feedback and you constrict, you get defensive. But I'm really trying, but it wasn't my fault, but it's not my department, that's not my job, that's not my responsibility, no one explained this to me, how am I supposed to know? There's that constriction. And as all these stories or reasons are swirling around in your head, then it's hard to see that at the center of all of it, there's a thought. That when you get a little bit closer, is not even there anymore. Or maybe there's a feeling or a sensation, a belief, a memory. And out of a combination of all of these, that me is born. But it's an illusion. Right? Some of the sutras say it's like magicians conjuring up a trick. It's a mirage. It's like a bubble. And so there is no me that is separate, independent from any other me's, any other things, anything at all in the entire universe. Each and every moment, this huge combination of causes and conditions is coming together to make the sense of me. And because causes and conditions change, that me changes. This does not mean, however, your feelings aren't real. Your relationships don't matter because they're empty. They matter very much. And so what we're trying to see is to point out that there's always more to the story. That there is, as I have mentioned in the past, a conventional truth and an ultimate truth. This is also Nagarjuna's teaching. The two truths. Conventionally, Zuisei is here, sitting in front of you, separate, different from you. There is a being we can call Zuisei, who was born and very quickly named Vanessa, who experiences all sorts of things. And ultimately, there is no essence, no solid, separate Zuisei that goes from one moment to the next, unchanged. You see the difference? There is just a process. that web of causes and conditions. But it is helpful to know that I'm me. It's helpful to know that from moment to moment. It's helpful to know that when I wake up in the morning, I open my eyes, I know I'm me. That's very useful to know. I just need to remember that's not the whole story. And so ignorance is also ignorance about these two truths. We take conventional truth, mostly we take conventional truth to be the whole thing. That things don't exist independently, separately, is nisvabhava, without independent existence. And in Madhyamaka, this is the same as emptiness, which some teachers have said is the same as dependent origination. And so every single wave in the ocean is connected to every other wave, just by its water nature, but just by its isness. And just like that, every single one of us is connected to everyone and everything else by virtue of our interdependent nature. This is what dependent origination is saying. This is what the teaching on emptiness is saying. And this is also, and here I'm going out on a limb, but I've done that in the past, what loving kindness points to. This is why I have claimed, I have said that emptiness is not really empty. It's not a vacuum. It's not a void. Personally, I don't even like the word emptiness, to be honest, because it immediately gives us that sense like there's something lacking, there's something missing, there's something not there. I mean, what is not there is the sense of that fixed self. But then I have said that in my experience, when I have sat very still and very quiet, what I saw is that when I go beyond all my ideas, all of these words that I just spent the last hour spouting, when I sit in a room, mind source unmoved, filled like still water, like that koan says, what I see is that the ground of everything, that emptiness that connects everything, what that looks like, to put it some way, it's not that you see it with your eyes, but what that looks like, what that feels like, is love. When you get very still and very close to the truth of things, you see that it's not ignorance. That's the prime mover, bringing all of this into being. It's love. And if we could see that and stay close to that truth, this world would be a Buddha field. Every time we touch that, even for an instant, what we create is a Buddha field. And so we just have to shift our way of seeing. Actually, no, we just have to get out of our own way and see what was always there. We have to bring light to what was always present. That's what we're doing here. We're trying to see, in a way, that it's love that moves everything. Love is the ground, and love is the one who walks on it. It's the destination, and it is the path. But don't take my word for it. Just see it for yourself.